What would drive a mother to fake her own kidnapping, leaving her children and husband in agonizing uncertainty for 3 weeks? The answer lies in a web of lies that fooled an entire community and consumed thousands of hours of law enforcement resources. The morning of November 2nd, 2016, dawned crisp and clear in Redwood Valley, California, a small town nestled among rolling hills where everyone knew their neighbors and children played safely in tree-lined streets. For 34-year-old Cordelia Brennan, it seemed like any other Wednesday. She kissed her husband Blake goodbye as he left for his job at the electronics store, helped her 2 young children, 6-year-old Emma and 4-year-old Tyler, get ready for school, and settled into her routine as a stay-at-home mom. Cordelia was the picture of suburban motherhood. Blonde, petite, and always impeccably put together, she was active in the local parenting groups and maintained a carefully curated social media presence, showcasing her family's seemingly perfect life. Her Instagram feed was filled with photos of homemade lunches, family hiking trips, and inspirational quotes about motherhood and gratitude. But beneath the surface of this picture-perfect existence, cracks were beginning to show. That afternoon, as was her custom, Cordelia laced up her running shoes for her daily jog through the scenic trails that wound through the wooded areas surrounding their neighborhood. It was a routine she'd maintained for years, a slice of personal time that helped her stay fit and clear her mind. Blake knew her schedule by heart. She always returned by 2 p.m. to pick up the children from their after-school program. By 2:30 p.m., when Cordelia failed to appear at the school, concerned staff members began calling her cell phone. No answer. By 3 p.m., they contacted Blake at work. His heart immediately began racing with a dread he couldn't quite explain. "She's never late," Blake told the school administrator, his voice tight with worry. "Something's wrong." Blake left work immediately, driving the familiar route home while calling Cordelia's phone repeatedly. Each ring that went unanswered felt like a hammer blow to his chest. When he arrived at their house on Maple Street, Cordelia's car sat in the driveway, but she was nowhere to be found. Racing back to the area where she typically ran, Blake's worst fears seemed to materialize when he spotted Cordelia's iPhone lying on the ground near the old Stage Road trail. Its screen cracked as if it had been dropped or thrown. Her earbuds were tangled nearby, and her house key was attached to the phone case, but there was no other sign of his wife. At 5:47 p.m., Blake made the call that would change everything. 911, what's your emergency? My wife is missing. Blake's voice cracked as he spoke to the dispatcher. She went for a run this morning and never came home. I found her phone on the trail, and she would never leave our kids. Something terrible has happened. Within hours of Blake's 911 call, the Shasta County Sheriff's Office had launched a full-scale missing person investigation. Detective Sarah Martinez, a 15-year veteran with the department who specialized in missing persons cases, took the lead on what would become one of the most complex and emotionally charged cases of her career. When I first met Blake that evening, I could see the genuine terror in his eyes, Detective Martinez would later recall. He was shaking, barely coherent, and kept repeating that Cordelia would never abandon their children. His distress seemed completely authentic. The initial investigation revealed few clues. The trail where Cordelia's phone was discovered showed no obvious signs of a struggle, though the remote location made it an ideal spot for someone to be approached by an attacker. Bloodhounds were brought in to track Cordelia's scent, but the trail went cold at the roadside, suggesting she had been taken away in a vehicle. Word of Cordelia's disappearance spread quickly through Redwood Valley's tight-knit community of 8,000 residents. Within 24 hours, hundreds of volunteers had joined the search effort, combing through dense forests, checking abandoned buildings, and distributing flyers with Cordelia's photograph throughout Northern California. The local community center became an impromptu command post, with folding tables laden with coffee, sandwiches, and maps marked with search grids. Blake, flanked by his and Cordelia's parents, made tearful pleas to the media. "Please, if you have my wife, just let her come home to our babies," Blake said during a press conference, his voice breaking as he held up a family photo. "Emma keeps asking when mommy is coming home, and I don't know what to tell her. Cordelia is everything to us. She's the heart of our family." The case quickly gained national attention, partly due to Cordelia's photogenic appearance, and partly because of the mysterious circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Cable news programs picked up the story, and the hashtag #FindCordelia began trending on social media platforms. Anonymous donors contributed to a reward fund that quickly grew to $50,000. Local businesses donated food and supplies for search volunteers. The Case Foundation, a nonprofit organization that assisted families of missing persons, sent representatives to support Blake and coordinate media relations. But as days turned into weeks with no concrete leads, investigators began to expand their focus. They conducted extensive background checks on both Blake and Cordelia, interviewed friends and family members, and analyzed the couple's financial records and digital communications. What they discovered painted a more complicated picture of the Brennan family's seemingly perfect life. As Detective Martinez delved deeper into the investigation, troubling patterns began to emerge. Financial records revealed that despite Blake's steady income and their modest lifestyle, the Brennan family was struggling with debt. Credit card statements showed numerous cash advances and charges for luxury items that seemed inconsistent with their claimed financial situation. More concerning were the discoveries made on Cordelia's computer and social media accounts. While her public Instagram and Facebook profiles presented the image of a devoted wife and mother, her private digital life told a different story. Investigators found evidence of secret email accounts and messaging apps that Cordelia had used to communicate with men she had met online. We discovered that Cordelia had been engaging in what appeared to be emotional affairs with multiple men she met through various social media platforms and dating apps, Detective Martinez explained. She had created elaborate fictional personas and backstories, often portraying herself as unhappy in her marriage or facing various personal crises. One particularly significant relationship had developed with a man named James Rodriguez, who lived over 600 miles away in Riverside County. Phone records showed that Cordelia had been in frequent contact with Rodriguez in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, sometimes exchanging dozens of text messages per day. When investigators contacted Rodriguez, he initially seemed cooperative but nervous. He confirmed that he had been communicating with someone he knew as Cora, who had told him she was going through a difficult divorce and was afraid of her estranged husband. Rodriguez claimed he had offered to help her start fresh in Southern California, but insisted he had no direct involvement in her disappearance. Detective Martinez also uncovered concerning patterns in Cordelia's behavior leading up to November 2nd. Neighbors reported seeing her walking alone at odd hours, sometimes appearing to be on phone calls that seemed emotionally intense. Her sister, Melissa, mentioned during questioning that Cordelia had seemed unusually anxious and secretive in recent months, often deflecting questions about her well-being with overly cheerful responses. Something was definitely bothering her, Melissa told investigators. But whenever I tried to ask what was wrong, she would just smile and change the subject. Looking back, it feels like she was living a double life. Perhaps most troubling of all was what investigators found when they examined Cordelia's internet search history in the weeks before her disappearance. The searches included terms like how to disappear without a trace, faking your own death, and missing person investigations procedures. There were also searches related to bus and train schedules to Southern California. Despite these red flags, investigators had to balance their growing suspicions with the possibility that Cordelia had indeed been the victim of a crime. The case remained officially classified as a missing person investigation, and the search efforts continued. After 22 days of intensive searching, extensive media coverage, and mounting investigation costs that had exceeded $150,000, the case took a dramatic turn that no one could have predicted. At 4:30 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning, November 24, 2016, Cordelia Brennan was found by a passing motorist on the side of County Road 17, approximately 150 miles south of Redwood Valley. She was bound with restraints, appeared malnourished and disoriented, and had visible injuries including a black eye, cuts on her face, and what appeared to be a brand burned into her right shoulder. The motorist, local resident Patricia Chun, later described the harrowing scene. I was driving to my sister's house for Thanksgiving dinner when I saw what looked like a person lying by the roadside. When I got closer, I realized it was a woman, and she was hurt. She kept saying, "Help me, they let me go, they let me go." Cordelia was immediately transported to Woodland Memorial Hospital, where she was treated for dehydration, minor injuries, and psychological trauma. Blake, who had been notified by police, made the 3-hour drive to the hospital with Emma and Tyler, believing their nightmare was finally over. The reunion was emotional and heavily documented by media outlets that had been following the case. Video footage showed Blake embracing Cordelia in her hospital bed while their children clung to her, all of them crying tears of relief and joy. "I never gave up hope," Blake told reporters outside the hospital. "I knew she was strong, and I knew she would find a way back to us. We're just grateful to have her home." But Cordelia's account of her captivity would prove to be as complex and mysterious as her disappearance had been. During her initial interview with Detective Martinez and FBI Special Agent David Park, who had joined the investigation due to its potential interstate nature, Cordelia provided a detailed but disturbing account of her alleged kidnapping and captivity. According to Cordelia, she had been approached while jogging by two Hispanic women driving a dark SUV. The women, whom she described as being in their 20s or 30s, had initially asked for directions before suddenly grabbing her and forcing her into their vehicle at gunpoint. "They kept calling me names in Spanish," Cordelia told investigators, her voice barely above a whisper. "They said I was going to pay for something, but I didn't understand what they meant. They blindfolded me and drove for what felt like hours." Cordelia claimed she had been held in a small, windowless room that smelled of mold and cigarettes. Her captors had provided minimal food and water and had subjected her to physical and psychological torture. The brand on her shoulder, she said, had been inflicted as punishment when she tried to escape. "They were obsessed with my appearance," she continued. "They cut my hair because they said I was too pretty. They kept saying they were going to teach me a lesson about thinking I was better than them." The most puzzling aspect of her story was the explanation for her release. Cordelia claimed that on the morning she was found, one of her captors had suddenly announced they were letting her go. She was blindfolded, driven to the location where she was discovered, and released with her hands and feet still bound. "The younger one seemed to feel sorry for me," Cordelia explained. "She said something about it being a mistake, that I wasn't who they thought I was. Then they just left me there." The account was deeply disturbing and garnered immediate sympathy from the public and media. However, for seasoned investigators like Detective Martinez and Agent Park, several elements of the story raised immediate red flags. While Cordelia recovered at home with her family, investigators began the meticulous process of verifying her account. What they discovered over the following weeks would fundamentally alter the trajectory of the case. Medical examination revealed that while Cordelia had indeed sustained injuries, they were not consistent with the level of trauma one would expect from 22 days of captivity and torture. The brand on her shoulder was superficial and appeared to have been self-inflicted. Her weight loss, while noticeable, was not severe enough to indicate prolonged starvation. More concerning were the results of DNA testing performed on Cordelia's clothing and restraints. While investigators expected to find evidence of her captors, the forensic analysis revealed the presence of DNA from an unexpected source. James Rodriguez, the man from Riverside County with whom Cordelia had been communicating before her disappearance. When confronted with this evidence, Rodriguez's story began to change dramatically. Under pressure from FBI agents, he eventually admitted that Cordelia had contacted him on November 1st, the day before her disappearance, claiming she was in danger and needed somewhere to hide. She said her husband was abusive and that she needed to disappear for a while, Rodriguez told investigators. "She begged me to help her, said she would make it worth my while. I felt sorry for her, so I agreed to let her stay at my place." According to Rodriguez, Cordelia had spent most of her missing 22 days at his apartment in Riverside County. She had convinced him that her injuries were the result of domestic violence and had asked him to help her create a cover story for her disappearance. She said if anyone found out she had run away, her husband would get custody of the kids and she would never see them again, Rodriguez explained. "She made up the whole kidnapping story and asked me to help her stage her release. I know it sounds crazy now, but she was very convincing." Cell phone records corroborated Rodriguez's account, showing that Cordelia's phone had been in the Riverside County area for most of the time she was missing, despite her claims of being held captive by unknown assailants. Armed with this new evidence, investigators returned to Redwood Valley to re-interview Cordelia. The confrontation took place on December 15, 2016, in the same conference room where she had first recounted her tale of kidnapping and torture. Detective Martinez began by presenting the DNA evidence and cell phone records that contradicted Cordelia's story. For nearly 2 hours, Cordelia maintained her innocence, insisting that Rodriguez was lying and that the evidence had somehow been contaminated or misunderstood. "I was kidnapped," she insisted, tears streaming down her face. "Why would I put my family through this? Why would I hurt my children like that?" You have to believe me." But as the evidence mounted and investigators presented more contradictions in her story, Cordelia's composure began to crack. When shown surveillance footage from a convenience store near Rodriguez's apartment that clearly showed her making purchases while she was supposedly being held captive, she finally broke down. "I was scared," she sobbed. "I was so scared of everything falling apart. Blake was going to find out about James, and I was going to lose my kids. I just needed time to figure things out." Over the next several hours, Cordelia provided a full confession that revealed the elaborate nature of her deception. She had indeed orchestrated her own disappearance, spending most of the time at Rodriguez's apartment while the massive search effort consumed resources and traumatized her family. The injuries she displayed upon her return had been largely self-inflicted, with some assistance from Rodriguez, who had initially believed her claims of being an abuse victim. The elaborate story of Hispanic kidnappers had been fabricated to deflect suspicion and generate sympathy. "I never meant for it to go this far," Cordelia said. "I thought I could just disappear for a few days and then come back with some story about getting lost or having an accident. But then the whole community got involved and the media picked it up, and I didn't know how to stop it." The revelation that Cordelia had faked her own kidnapping sent shockwaves through Redwood Valley and the broader community that had invested so much emotional energy and resources in finding her. The backlash was swift and severe. Blake, who had spent 3 weeks believing his wife was being tortured by unknown assailants, was devastated by the betrayal. "I feel like I never really knew her," he said in a statement released through his attorney. "The woman I married, the mother of my children, would never have put us through this hell. I don't know who this person is." The financial impact of Cordelia's deception was staggering. The Shasta County Sheriff's Office estimated that the investigation had cost taxpayers over $200,000 in overtime pay, search and rescue operations, and forensic analysis. The FBI had dedicated significant resources to what they believed was a potential interstate kidnapping case. Beyond the monetary costs were the human consequences. Hundreds of volunteers had spent countless hours searching for Cordelia, believing they were trying to save someone's life. Local businesses had donated thousands of dollars in supplies and services. The Case Foundation had diverted resources from other legitimate missing persons cases. "This kind of deception doesn't just hurt the immediate family," explained Dr. Rebecca Torres, a forensic psychologist who consulted on the case. "It damages the trust that communities place in missing persons cases and can actually make it harder for real victims to get the help they need." On March 3, 2022, nearly 6 years after her fake kidnapping, Cordelia Brennan was arrested at her new residence in Costa Mesa, California. She had been living under her maiden name, working as a part-time administrative assistant, and had minimal contact with her children, who remained in Blake's custody. The legal proceedings that followed were closely watched by both local and national media. Cordelia was charged with multiple federal crimes, including making false statements to federal investigators and mail fraud related to the GoFundMe campaign that had been established to aid in her search. During the trial, prosecutors painted a picture of a woman whose need for attention and sympathy had driven her to elaborate deceptions that had profound consequences for her family and community. They presented evidence of Cordelia's pattern of fabricating dramatic personal crises to gain sympathy and attention from online relationships. The defendant didn't just lie to investigators, prosecutor Michael Chin argued in his opening statement. She orchestrated an elaborate hoax that traumatized her own children, deceived hundreds of volunteers, and wasted thousands of hours of law enforcement resources that could have been used to help real victims. Cordelia's defense team, led by attorney Patricia Rodriguez, no relation to James Rodriguez, argued that their client had been suffering from severe mental health issues that had impaired her judgment. They presented testimony from psychologists who suggested that Cordelia had been experiencing a form of dissociative disorder that made her unable to distinguish between reality and fantasy. "My client was not a criminal mastermind," Rodriguez argued. "She was a deeply troubled woman who made a series of increasingly desperate decisions while in the grip of a severe psychological crisis. She needs treatment, not punishment." The trial lasted 2 weeks and included emotional testimony from Blake, who described the agony of believing his wife was being tortured while simultaneously trying to comfort their traumatized children. The children, now teenagers, chose not to testify but submitted written statements describing the long-term impact of their mother's actions on their lives. James Rodriguez, who had initially been considered as a co-conspirator, ultimately cooperated with prosecutors and received a plea deal in exchange for his testimony. He described how Cordelia had manipulated him into believing her claims of domestic abuse and had convinced him to participate in staging her rescue. On November 7, 2022, after deliberating for less than 6 hours, the jury found Cordelia Brennan guilty on all charges. Judge William Harper sentenced her to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release, and ordered her to pay $309,686 in restitution to cover the costs of the investigation. As Cordelia began serving her sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California, the community of Redwood Valley began the long process of healing from the deception that had consumed so much of their collective energy and resources. Blake, who had divorced Cordelia while she awaited trial, worked with a therapist to help Emma and Tyler process the complex emotions surrounding their mother's actions. Now teenagers, they struggled with feelings of abandonment, betrayal, and confusion about how to reconcile their memories of their mother with the reality of what she had done. The hardest part is helping them understand that their mother's actions weren't their fault, Blake explained in a rare interview. They've asked me why she didn't love them enough to stay, why she was willing to hurt them like that. Those are questions I'm still trying to answer myself. Detective Martinez, who had invested so much of herself in the initial investigation, reflected on the case's impact on her approach to future missing persons investigations. "You never want to become cynical in this job," she said. "Every missing person case has to be taken seriously because most of them are legitimate. But the Brennan case definitely taught me to trust but verify everything, no matter how compelling the story seems." The case also had broader implications for how law enforcement agencies approach missing persons investigations and how communities respond to such cases. The Shasta County Sheriff's Office implemented new protocols for verifying information in high-profile missing persons cases, while advocacy groups used the case as an example of why resources for legitimate missing persons cases remain critically important. Dr. Torres, the forensic psychologist, noted that cases like Cordelia's highlight the complex psychological factors that can drive individuals to elaborate deceptions. There's often a perfect storm of personality disorders, life stressors, and social media culture that creates an environment where someone might think this kind of deception is a viable solution to their problems, she explained. Cordelia Brennan was released from federal prison in April 2024 after serving 16 months of her sentence. She now lives quietly in a small apartment in Central California, working at a local nonprofit organization and attempting to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. Her relationship with her children remains strained and limited to occasional supervised visits. The case of Cordelia Brennan serves as a stark reminder of the far-reaching consequences of deception and the profound impact that one person's choices can have on an entire community. It highlights the dedication of law enforcement officers and volunteers who respond to missing persons cases, as well as the importance of thorough investigation, even when initial evidence seems compelling. For the Brennan children, now 16 and 14, the journey toward healing continues. They have learned to navigate their complex feelings about their mother while building strong relationships with their father and extended family members who have supported them throughout this ordeal. Blake Brennan has remarried and speaks occasionally about the importance of supporting families affected by similar deceptions. He has established a small foundation that provides counseling services for children whose parents have committed crimes that attracted significant media attention. "What happened to us changed everything," Blake reflects. "But we've learned that you can survive even the worst betrayals if you have people who love you and you're willing to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be." The question that opened this story, what would drive a mother to fake her own kidnapping, ultimately has a complex answer rooted in psychology, desperation, and poor decision-making. But perhaps more importantly, the case demonstrates the resilience of communities and families when faced with deception, and the ultimate power of truth to prevail even in the most elaborate web of lies. As Detective Martinez concluded in her final report on the case, the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. Our job is to keep digging until we find it, no matter how long it takes or how uncomfortable it makes people. That's what justice requires, and that's what victims, real victims, deserve. The Brennan case remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of deception and the importance of truth, serving as a reminder that in a world where social media can amplify both genuine cries for help and elaborate fabrications, the careful work of investigation and verification remains more crucial than ever.